Today's shiur begins 14 lines from the top. We began the marking scheme that we are continuing with during our last shiur. We see a series of amoroyim that are featured in bow ties that deal with the topics of either or Eidim Zomimim or Chovel B'Chavero, and the fact that the Torah in these two specific areas requires a financial restitution at the point of their offense, and when we say financial restitution, the point is financial restitution to the exclusion of lashing. So that even though you may hold, for example, that wherever there's malchus and momon, that you will impose malchus and not momon, not so in the case of Eidim Zomimim and Chovel B'Chavero. And these terms we already discussed in our previous shiurim, so we're not going to go over the definitions as we find ourselves truly in the middle of a very long sugya begun at the bottom of Lamed Aleph Amid Beis and due to continue till Lamed Hey Amid Beis. Rebbe Elazar Omer, we're now in the Gemara text. He says, Eidim Zomimim Mamona Mishalmi Milka Loloki. Eidim Zomimim who tried to frame someone and, let's say, make them experience a financial loss. They themselves have to compensate the defendant to the tune of that amount, and they will not get lashes. The Rashi at this point says, Reb Elazar Omer, Eidim Zomim Demamona Mishalmi V'lo Loku Lo Tzrifi Kra. Up till now, we've been trying to present psukim to prove this point. He says you don't need psukim. The Svarahu the Malchus Lo Shayach Bahu. It is a matter of logic that will lead us to conclude that they could not possibly be punished with lashing. So that even though there is a negative command that they are violating, they violate lo saneh b'reach ha'ed shoker, and negative commands generate lashing, not so in the case of Eidim Zomimim. And we now continue with the Gemara, Mishum delav b'nei hasra ninhu. They simply are not subject to receiving a warning. Before you can administer court lashing, there must be a verbal warning given to the offender. And here you would have to give a warning to them, issue a warning before they testify, before they testify, which turns out to be their false testimony, and that cannot be done, as the Gemara will explain. And since you can't give them lashings because of what we just said, a warning would be impossible, so the only punishment left to give to them would be a financial-based punishment, i.e. they have to pay money. The Gemara now will be characterized with a new marking, and on the side, under the Mivneh heading, you can see the house shape, Ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of a back and forth discussion. The note continues saying, Eidim Zomimim Einom B'nei Hasra V'lochein Ein Malchus. We're going to show how they cannot be given a warning, and since they can't be given a warning, and we're talking in practical terms, they therefore cannot receive lashing. And the inverted house represents a dechia, a rejection of whatever was said prior to this. So we start the Gemara with a long point, followed by a question, and followed by a long response. Omar Rava Teda Nisri Behuemas. Let it be known that they're not B'nei Hasra, because Nisri is to give the warning when, Emas, when. Nisri B'umei Kara, to give them a warning a day or an hour before they actually say their testimony. Ishtalin, we have to take into consideration they might have forgotten the warning, and if they are not aware of the warning, so it's not a warning. Nisri behu b'shas maisa, to give them a warning as they're about to testify. Parshi v'lo misadi, they're not going to testify at all, and Rashi adds, even to tell the truth, they're not going to testify, on the grounds that since we are suspect in the eyes of the court, why should we get involved with all of this? We don't want to be held suspect, so that you can't issue them the warning immediately before their testimony. You'll thereby cancel any chances of getting even honest testimony. Nisri behu libasof, to issue the warning after they testified. Ma'idahave, what was, and Rashi adds a halachic dimension to this, that once witnesses testified, they can't withdraw their testimony afterwards. Your testimony is like etching it in rock, so to speak, and you can't withdraw it. So what's the point of warning against an offense once the offense has been committed and it can't be withdrawn? Maskif law Abaye. Abaye says, well, what do you mean? They can be warned, and you have here a couple suggestions. Now, the numbering scheme that you see, there's an aleph over Maskif law Abaye, because Abaye, he raises an objection to what Rava just said, and there's a base where you see Rav Acha also, Maskif law Rav Acha, he will raise an objection as well. The Roman numeral number 1 over Abaye's name represents the first of two Lashonos, two versions of Abaye himself. So in the meantime, Maskif lo Abaye v'nisri behu b'soch kedei dibor. You can wait with the warning till after they testify, and immediately. B'soch kedei dibor is an expression meaning, let us just say, without getting into the details of what that is, but tokdei bibor means within a moment's speech, which means within 2-3 seconds of their completing their testimony, you can issue the warning, and that keeps things alive, and they can still withdraw. So if the purpose of the warning is to keep them from sinning, we have a method. We can issue the warning toch kedei dibor, and since it's so close to the actual testimony, it sort of keeps their testimony alive, and it's not etched in rock yet, and therefore they have an opportunity after they hear my warning. If they immediately withdraw, then fine and good. And at the same time, you see, we didn't deter them from testifying because we didn't issue the warning prior to their statement of testimony. Maskif law Rav Acha brei de Rav Ika, and he joins Abaye in challenging Rava, and says v'nisri behu meikara v'nirmas behu remuzi. Issue the warning meikara. As we saw before, we rejected the meikara suggestion because they might forget. No, issue the warning an hour before, and when they're about to testify, if you think they will, if you suspect they might have forgotten the warning, you can use some kind of hand motions, some kind of remez. Remez is a hint to them, reminding them of the warning, and doing so in a soft way won't deter them from testifying. And as far as the forgetting aspect, you can see that we have this mechanism of reminding them. So how can Rebbe Lazar and the bow tie claim that Edom Zomimim don't get Malchus because they're not subject to Hasra? Hodar Omar Abaye. Now notice the house shape repositions itself, and matching the position that it was when Rava entered the picture. And you'll see here that Abaye essentially is withdrawing from what he said. Then Abaye said, Lav milsahi da amri. That which I said, that Edom Zomimim require hasra, and that it's possible to provide that hasra, all of that is not to be said. Lav milsi means it's nothing. I reject and withdraw that which I said. Eidim zomimim don't require warning whatsoever. So that Abaye here is withdrawing the idea that he said a moment before that you could give them hasra, but just do a toch kedei dibur after their testimony. That is not necessary. He says, if you were to think that they require hasra, ki lo masrinan behu, lo katlinan lahu, then if we wouldn't give them warning, and let us say they came to testify about someone as having committed a capital offense, and the defendant deserves to be executed, and then it turns out that they're lying. If they wouldn't receive the warning, are you telling me that those witnesses would not be executed? Mi ika midi, is there anything, the inhu bo katu below hasra, the inhu bo hasra? They came to falsely condemn an innocent man. To falsely condemn an innocent man means to see to it that this innocent guy dies without having received a warning. After all, the guy never did anything wrong to even have received a warning beforehand to begin with. So they came to condemn to death an innocent man who never received a warning, and now you're going to tell me that they deserve and require a warning? But we require in the whole realm of Eidim Zomimim the pasuk that says Vasisim lo kasher zomam lasos liachiv v'leka. The way we deal with the Eidim Zomimim is very simply what they try to do to the defendant, they get themselves. And they tried to condemn to death a man without providing him with a warning. After all, the guy never did it anyway. And therefore, they should be put to death likewise without any need for a warning. So Abaye here is rejecting that which he said at stage Roman numeral number 1 of Abaye, that the Eidim Zomimim require a warning and it could be done. Toch kedei dibur, not so. Eidim Zomimim do not need any warnings to begin with. After all, they tried to condemn a man, to see a man receive a court-administered punishment, without having received a warning. So why in the world should they receive a warning? Maskif law Rav Samo Braid Rav Yirmiyah. So now Rav Samo raises a question. Elo me'ata ben grushu ben chalutza. According to what Abaye just said, that the way we treat Eidim Zomimim, namely they don't require a warning on the grounds of kasher zomam, there are a couple examples of testimony that Eidim Zomimim offer in which we do not deal with them through the kasher zomam method. Kasher zomam means we do to them what they try to do to the defendant. If you have two phonies, two false witnesses, two Eidim Zomimim that try to label an individual as a ben grusha, claiming that, your father was a Kohen and he married a grusha and you're the product of that union. A grusha is a man whose father, a Kohen, married a divorcee. The resultant child is a cholol. He's called in the Gemara here a ben grusha ben chalutza, the son of a divorcee or the son of a chalutza, a woman who did chalitza. And he's unfit to the kahuna. So they tried to take someone who was basically a kosher Kohen and turn him into an unkosher Kohen. We don't take the Eidim Zomim and say, you guys are now unkosher Kohanim. Can you imagine if they were not Kohanim to begin with? That's not a punishment to them. They're not Kohanim to begin with, so that by making them an unkosher Kohen wouldn't be anything. So, but yet we do punish the Eidim Zomimim. So the Gemara points out, or that is Rav Sama says, according to what Abaye just said, that they don't get lashing because the way we deal with Eidim Zomim is through Kasher Zomam. What happens in a case when you have Eidim Zomimim that falsely testified that the so-and-so is a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza, the Lo Mikasher Zomam called Misrabi, where they get a punishment, but their punishment just so happens to be lashing, but they get that punishment not based on Kasher Zomam. They weren't trying to condemn a person to receive lashing. They don't get lashing because they were trying to make someone else get lashed. They get lashing because they violated a negative command of testifying falsely. So their punishment is not through Kasher Zomam. Liboy Hasra, are you going to say that those kind of Eidim Zomimim would require a warning beforehand? Omar Kra. The Gemara responds to that and says, no, they're not going to require a warning beforehand. The Pasuk says, Mishpat echad yeh lochem, that when we administer punishments in the Torah, one uniform method is to be done. And that means Mishpat hashavet lekulchem, an equal form of justice for all of them. And Rashi says, Mishpat Hashava v'kimat the roiv zomim lav b'nei hasraninu, since the majority of Eidim Zomimim are not subject to hasra, and you can, if you want, you can use Abaye's reasoning, since they were trying to condemn someone without his receiving hasra, so they too they get punished without receiving hasra. So Haninami, witnesses that come to testify, Ben Grusha, Ben Chalutz, also lo bo hasra, for the sake of, we'll say, uniformity in justice. Rav Shisha Breder Avidi, Omar, again you see a bow tie, it's another Amora dealing with one of the two topics we mentioned earlier, in this case, Chovel b'chavero nami. Note, first of all, that we have a long point ahead of us. Chovel b'chavero nami, mamoino mishale milkelo loki mehocha. He has, Rav Shisha presents his approach to how is it that we know that that one who injures his friend, chovel b'chavero, will pay money and not receive lashing. That even though there's an offense that has been committed that warrants lashing, but it also warrants, he also caused financial loss through injuring the person, we punish the offender through payment and not through the lashing. And where do we know that from? Mehocha. From the following. The pasuk is found in Sefer Shmos Perek Chaf Aleph, and the psukim, there are a few psukim, and they describe a situation where there are two men that are fighting with one another, and there's a pregnant woman as an innocent bystander. And in the course of this fight, one of them punches the woman and causes a miscarriage, and we'll see very shortly that their fight is a fight to the death. And the psukim make reference to the possibility that the woman that they punch, she might end up dying as a result of this fight. And that is for us just the background for this piece of Gemara. So, in the case of a person who's chayav momon and malchus, that is in a case of chovel b'chavero, where there's an issue of momon, there's an issue of malchus, we impose a financial penalty on the offender and not lashing. From the following: there are two people that are fighting. A pregnant woman gets hit, and a miscarriage ensues. A matzis is a fight to the death. We're dealing with two people that are involved in a fight to the death. In other words, there's murderous intent in this particular case. Dichtiv, as the pasuk says, v'im oson yeh v'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh. And if oson, if a calamity results, then you will then pay a life because of a life. Now, Rashi adds some details over here, that even though in the fight to the death, A and B were fighting with each other. A wanted to kill B, B wanted to kill A, and A, instead of killing B, ended up killing the lady. That's called niskave larog zev horakezeh. Intent to kill one and ended up killing someone else. That itself is a machlokes tanoim. Let us point that out ahead of time. There's a Tanaic controversy whether that is in fact a capital offense. In other words, does that deserve capital punishment? So niskave larog zev horakezeh, we say is chayev. That is true according to the Rabbanan. There is a dissenting opinion on that, and it is the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe holds, and we'll see this later in the Gemara on Beis, that himself is not, if he ends up killing someone, he himself is not put to death, but rather he pays money. So bear that in mind as we go on in the Gemara. So we have the Shita of the Rabbanan, and the Pasuk says if the lady ends up dying in this scenario, so the man who hit her will be put to death. That's v'nosato nefesh tachas nefesh. Heichi domi. What are the circumstances? Idolo asru be amay mikdal. If there was no warning ahead of time, why should he be put to death? Ela pshita the asru be. It's talking about someone that must have received a warning beforehand. Umusru ledavar chomer have musru ledavar hakal. Someone who receives a warning for a serious type sin, that warning subsumes a warning for a lesser offense that might take place. So that when you warn the person, let us say, you better stop what you're doing because you're about to kill someone, and killing someone is subject to capital punishment, that includes in it a warning for malkos. Even though you don't specify that your action is also, let's say, the violation of a negative command, which carries with it a malkos punishment, a lashing punishment, it's subsumed within the warning that you gave him that you would get, that he's subject to the death penalty. That, in the Lashon of the Gemara, is so beautifully phrased. Umusra l'davar chomer, one who is warned for a serious matter, have a musra l'davar hakal, is considered warned for the lighter offense. So that a hasra for misa includes within it a hasra for malchus. V'omar rachmona, and in that same Torah section within Shmos Chaf Aleph, it says v'lo ye'ason, if there is no death, anosh ye'onesh. Which means, and if no one dies, so anosh ye'onesh means money will be paid, and no malkos. The Rashi says at the bottom, have a musu davar kalshim yakenu v'lo yomus yilakeh. If hitting takes place without death, so he will be punished. Vafilu hachi Omar Rachmona. Now we did point out in previous shurim that hitting someone is in fact a violation of Pen Yosef, a negative command not to hit. When you have no death and hence there's no one that's subject to capital punishment, ye'onesh demei vlados. The pasuk says anosh ye'onesh. That means he shall be penalized with paying the value of the miscarriage. Even though there is a warning for malkos, as we pointed out, the warning for the death penalty includes the warning for malkos. Alma mishale veino lokes. So you see from this story in the Torah that he will end up, if there is no death penalty meted out, he will end up paying. So, to summarize, this is a case of chovel b'chavero, mamona meshale milka lo loki. Money is paid and no malkos. And that's all alluded to in this last phrase. V'lo yelson, if there's no death, no shianesh, money will be paid, and not malchus. We have a couple of questions, and we have a note on the side under the mivneh. The triangle that you see introduces two kushios al halimud shel Rav Shisha Brei de Ravidi. The ode two kushios al halimud shel Rabbi Yankiv min HaPakod. Now, Rav Yankiv min HaPakod, we haven't seen him yet. He's going to appear on the upper part of Omid Beis. You can see about 9 lines from the top. You see another bow tie. Yesh Lahoir, we want to point out the kushya number 1, who oisedover al shtei hashitos. So to make things easy for you, realize that question number 1, that's introduced here with a triangle number 1, will be the same question that is going to be raised on Rav Yankiv min HaPakod's teaching. And if you want to skip ahead, you can see this structurally by looking for a similar type triangle after Rav Yankiv min HaPakod. You have to skim down under his name approximately 9-10 lines, and you'll see a maskif Rav Ashi, a triangle number 1, and what you see right now, maskif Rav Ashi, it happens to be the same speaker. He will present that question, the same question, on Rav Yankiv min HaPakod. So what we learn here will be repeated there. Maskif law, we read in the text 3 lines from the bottom of Omid Aleph. Maskif of Rav Ashi, Mimai de Musul Dover Chomravi Musul Dover Kal. Who says that the warning for something stringent subsumes a warning for something more lenient? Dilma lo have. Maybe that rule is simply non-existent. Now, if you accept this question, so we don't have a case of someone who was going to get malchus anyway. We need to find a case of someone who was going to get malchus, and instead of receiving the malchus, he will be punished with money, with the need to pay money, and not receive the malchus. That's our whole point. But if we create a situation where there's no malchus for whatever reason, in this case because there was no warning for it, so then we're back to square one. We were not accomplishing what we set out to do. So this question right now is that very point. Who says that he had a warning for malchus on the grounds that a warning for something more severe like capital punishment includes within it, subsumes a warning for malchus. So maybe there was no warning for malchus on those grounds. And furthermore, in timtzilom have, and if you say, yeah, listen, it's quite logical that musul davar chamur includes hasra for davar akal. Mimai de misa chamura. Who says, this is a second point that Rav Ashi is making, who says that misa, that execution, at the court execution, is more stringent. Dilma malkos chamur. Now this might raise some eyebrows. We're here at the top of Omid Beis. Now, Dilma malkos chamur, maybe lashing represents something more severe. And as I say, if your eyebrows are raised, the Gemara explains that. Diyama Rav, ilmole nagduha. We dashed on the word nagduha, it means lashed. If it were so that ilmole nagduha l'chanan mishal v'azarya polchulet salma. There were we'll call them 3 heroes, 3 tzaddikim, Hanani, Mishael, Zaya, who were threatened or placed under or put under duress by King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylonia to bow down to a statue honoring the king, and they, out of a sense of Jewish pride, refused to bow to that idol or to that statue, and they were under the threat of death. That if they don't bow to that particular statue, they would be put to death. And well, they they did not yield. And the Rav is telling us that had they not been threatened with death, but rather if they had been beaten, nagdua, if they would have been lashed, they would have yielded. So that, what do we see from here? That the threat of death, they, by the way, were then they didn't yield, and they were thrown into a fiery furnace, and they survived, which is a major miracle that's recorded in the Tanakh. And the Rav is telling us that had they been lashed, they would have yielded. So what do we see? We see that lashing is a greater threat to the individual than death. Now, regarding this last point, that lashing is a greater threat than death, it's simply an inaccurate point for our discussion. We are talking in our discussion about court-administered lashing. We're not talking there about Jewish court-administered lashing. We're talking about a secular enemy authority threatening someone with lashes. There's a very big difference. Omar le Rav Sama Brei Rav Asi le Rav Ashi. V'yamri lo, another version of the names Rav Sama Brei Rav Ashi le Rav Ashi. Instead of the son of Rav Asi, the son of Rav Ashi says to Rav Ashi, V'lo shoni loch, do you not make a distinction bein hakol sheyesh lo kitzva l'hakol she'ein lo kitzva? Hakol means being hit or lashing. Lashing of the court, of the Jewish court, has a finished number, top number, final number that can be administered. Kitzvah means a set amount beyond which a person is not allowed to be lashed anymore. In the case of Hanan Mishah Zaya, the threat of lashings there would be lashings without any end to it. So a person psychologically, which has physiological results, a person can manage the court-administered lashing, and that in fact is a davar hakal relative to court execution. And that which Rav pointed out in the case of Hanan Mishah Zaya, that's not a court-administered lashing. That's an endless type lashing. That's something else that, in fact, could be viewed as more severe, more threatening than actual death. But that's not our topic. So, as far as the question that Rav Ashi poses, we have to, in order for Rav Shisha Brei de Rav Edi's source to be true, we have to assume that Musr l'davar chomor is considered Musr l'davar akal. If you deny that, then there's a problem with the Rav Shishi source, the Rav Shisha Bar Edi source. Maskif law Rav Yankev Minahar Pakoi Honicha l'Rabbanan. The source that Rav Shisha presented to us is fine if you accept the Rabbanon approach to that parsha, namely, let's continue in the Gemara. Honichel Rabbanon di Amri Nefesh Mamish. If you note the arrow, look back at Omid Aleph where the corresponding arrow appears. The pasuk has said, if death results, and we describe there, if the lady ends up dying, so the perpetrator, the offender, must die. His life for her life. That's the Rabbonon's approach to the pasuk. However, Rebbe Diamar Momon, Rebbe, in learning that pasuk, we said before, A and B were trying to kill each other, and instead of A killing B, A ends up killing the lady. We said Niskave Laro and had intent to kill the fellow he was fighting with, and he ended up killing someone else. Rebbe says that is not liable to capital punishment. And what does the pasuk mean when it says V'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh? Rebbe says, in that case, you have to pay. You have to offer the family of the victim financial restitution. But it's money. So then, my ika lemeimar. Then, what is there to say regarding the case of chovel b'chaveiro, when in fact, as far as Rebbe is concerned, you're talking about a situation where there was no warning whatsoever. Because the pasuk of also v'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh means if the woman dies, so the perpetrator has to pay money. There's no indication of the perpetrator in Rebbe's approach to the pasuk of any death penalty. And since there's no discussion of death penalty in the pasuk, there's no mention of warning either. There's no assumed warning. Warnings are given only when there is a death penalty that would need to be administered. There's no issue, though, of death penalty over there, according to Rebbe's approach to the pasuk. And it's all a matter of imposing a financial penalty on the perpetrator. So if there's no warning to talk about, so then you can't talk about malkos either. So what is the source for choivel b'chavero having to pay money and not getting the malchus, even though he was warned for the malchus? As far as Rebbe is concerned, that case, Shmois Perek Chof Aleph, regarding the fight and the eventual death of the woman, doesn't involve any malchus warning to begin with. Elo Omar Rav Yankov Nar Pekoy. Mishmei the Rava. So Rav Yankov, who was the last questioner, he offers his approach in the name of Rava, and he says Mehacha from the following: Im yokum v'salech b'chutz al mishanto v'niko hamakeh. The pasuk also in Shmos Chof Aleph describes a fight, and someone is injured, and it says that if the injured party gets better and walks outside with the aid of a support, a walking stick, the offender is then free. What's this pasuk saying? It's saying that if the guy gets better, so the perpetrator is innocent. Would you have thought that he should get killed? The guy that was hit got better, and then you would think we'll execute the offender. Elam Elamed, what this pasuk is really telling us is that there was a fight, and the person was injured in a very serious fashion, and the offender, and there was a question, his life was hanging in the balance, and the offender was put into jail. He was arrested, put into jail, he was incarcerated. And if the victim actually would die, katlinon lei, we would execute the offender for having committed a murder. So that's what the pasuk is alluding to, that the fellow was incarcerated, seeing whether or not the victim would die, and if he gets better, then we will release the offender. So the freeing, the v'niko hamakeh that is you see in this pasuk, essentially was alluding to the fact that he was incarcerated during the interim period, the waiting period. V'i lo mis, and if the victim doesn't die, what else does it say in the psukim? It says there in the verses, Shifto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. Money compensation. That's Shifto is a payment made for a person's, we'll call it work compensation, for his being rendered unemployment, and Rapo Yirapeh, medical expenses. That is imposed on the offender. Heichi domi, what are the circumstances that lay behind this case? Idolo asrube, if there was no warning ahead of time to the offender, that if he commits a murder, he himself will be subject to a death penalty. Amai miktil, then why would he be put to death in the first place? We said before that he was incarcerated during the interim waiting period to see whether or not he would be subject to a death penalty in the event that the victim dies. But if he didn't receive a warning, the offender would not have been put to death to begin with. Elapshita the asrube. Rather, it's obvious that there had been a warning, umusru l'dover chomer, musru l'dover akal, and the warning for the more serious type offense subsumes a warning for a lesser offense, for malkos. And here we have, in addition to the potential death penalty, we also have a fight that took place, someone attacking and injuring his friend. The Omar Rahmana, and the Torah says, even though you have a potential for malkos, the Torah says, Shifto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. All that happens to the perpetrator is he pays money, not malkos. So, after all is said and done, what Rav Yaakov Nahar Bakod is showing us is that the idea of chayvel b'chavero milka loki mamoina. So again, chayvel b'chavero milka loki mamoina mishalem is learned from this passage in the Torah. Again, Rav Ashi raises this objection, and we have a marking that we didn't point out earlier, but this double underline, you can see we have it here, and we had it before under Rav Ashi's name to emphasize the structure, same structure. Rav Ashi raises an objection to Rav Yankov's approach, and it's the same as the Gemara before, and we've marked it off the same way. Point 1 is Mimai the Musra L'Dover Chomer Havi Musra L'Dover Akal. Who says that we have to accept that principle that a warning for a more serious offense subsumes the warning for the lesser offense? Dilmo lo havi. Maybe it's not so. And if you were to say it's not so, you wouldn't have an example of someone that would have been subject to malkos to begin with. And then the next section, the number 2 section, is the same as we marked off on Omid Aleph. The continuation of Rav Ashi here is something that will be rejected by the Gemara, and hence we put it in brackets to show that the main objection of Rav Ashi is whether we should we assume the principle of Musar l'Dover Chomer Avi Musar l'Dover Chal, because what he's about to say now will in fact be rejected, as we saw in the previous presentation. The Imtim Silomar Have, and if you say that Musar l'Dover HaChomor is Musar l'Dover HaKal, Mimai de Miso Chamura, Dilmo Malkus Chomor, who says that the threat of death is more severe, maybe the threat of lashing is more severe. So that even though he received a warning for a possible court execution, that doesn't include a warning for the more severe punishment of malkos. The Omer Rav Yomoli Nagdu Lechan Mishov Azaya Pochel Itzalma, had they lashed, had Nebuchadnezzar lashed them, they would have yielded. Omar Le Rav Samo Berei de Rav Asi Le Rav Ashi V'Amri Lo. The other version of names, Rav Samo Berei de Rav Ashi Le Rav Ashi. V'Lo Shani Loch Bein Hakosh Yesh Lo Kitzva LaHakosh Ein Lo Kitzva. Do you not make a distinction between a limited number of lashings to a case of unlimited lashings? So that your suggestion that Malkus is more chomor on the basis of the story of Hanan and Moshav Azariah, you can forget that. Malkus is less chomor. But we are left with Rav Ashi's first question of, do we assume that Musar l'Dover Chomor includes a Hasra l'Dover Hakal? Maskiflo Rav Mori. Now Rav Mori represents a second attack on Rav Yaakov Nahar Bakod, and this is a new point. He says, "Mimai de b'mezid." Who says that whole story of V'hiko Ishes Re'eu that Rav Yaakov presented above, that pasuk is talking about someone who hit his friend deliberately with murderous intent. Venika equals mikatlo, and venika hamaka means that the perpetrator is now free from being subjected to a death penalty, which would have meant that there was a hasra, that there was a warning. Dilma b'shoigeg. Maybe the whole incident that the Torah is referring to in Shmois Chof Aleph, Im Yokum V'Yisalech, because all that story is a case of someone that had hit his friend unwittingly, unintentionally. That's called shogeg. And shogeg means something was totally unintentional. There was no warning beforehand. And the idea of incarceration that was alluded to in the pasuk, it wasn't an incarceration due to a possible death penalty, and the nika wasn't a freedom from death penalty, but rather it was an incarceration that would have been related to the cities of refuge, which is appropriate when an unintentional murder takes place, and there's no issue of money whatsoever in that case. Let me correct myself. And the idea there of being clean, of being freed, isn't being freed from death penalty. It means he's freed from needing to go to the city of refuge. City of refuge is only when the victim dies, but if the victim doesn't die, there's no need to remain in the city of refuge. And all that remains in such a case would be the need to pay money. But there's no issue there of something intentional with a concomitant warning. But had there been a warning, it could be that if the victim didn't die, he would get malchus and not pay money. So, as far as Rav Mori is concerned, the story above that Rav Yankov Narpakod presented doesn't present a case of any warning to begin with. Maybe the whole thing was b'shogeg, and v'nika, as the Gemara says, equals migolus, and he's now free from remaining in a city of refuge. Kashya. So this is a strong question. This is a question, a problem for Rav Yankov Narpakod's source of chovel b'chavero being penalized with money and not receiving the lashes that he could have received. Maybe he wasn't going to receive lashes in the first place, maybe because the whole story cited by Rav Yankov based on the pasuk was a case of shogeg, something unintentional. As we continue in the Gemara, we encounter a new crown shape. True, in today's shiur we didn't see a crown shape. The last one we saw, the number 2 crown, was back on Daf Lamed Beis Omid Beis. As you can see, we've indicated this in our markings, and in our previous shiur we also pointed out how Rashi is very structure sensitive. What is the role of Reish Lakish? Well, he's listed here as number 3. And under our topic heading says Shitas Reish Lakish liyashef astira b'sof lamed aleph u'med beis. This is Reish Lakish's approach to resolve the seeming contradiction that we first saw on lamed aleph u'med beis bein Mishnah seinu levein Mishnah b'Makis, between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Makis. And looking at Rashi, there's a starred Rashi a few lines down from here, where you can see Rashi is so sensitive to the issue of structure. Reish Lakish mehader ashinuya derumya deraminon bereish maitin masnisin demakis ad Kesubos. Reish Lakish is going back to offer a resolution of the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Makis. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, "Veilu nar sheishlem knas," and the Mishnah gave a list of girls that if they're raped, you will have to pay the 50 shekel kesef. There's a financial punishment imposed in the case of the rape of the respective women. And yet the Mishnah Makis said that elu naras lokin alehem, you get malchus for malchus, you get lashed for for raping. A list of women are listed, including the same women that you see listed in our Mishnah. So for raping those women listed in our Mishnah, financial punishment. The same situation in Maseches Makis, no financial punishment, but rather lashings. That would appear to be a contradiction. So now, we go to the Gemara text. Reish Lakish Omar, Ha Moni, our Mishnah that said Bo'ala Choso pays knas, that one who rapes his sister pays money, Rebbe Meir he. This is a unique Tanaic opinion. It's Rebbe Meir's opinion, that in addition to Malkos, there is also the need for payment. So we don't have a contradiction in Tanaic sources, we have a Tanaic controversy. Our Mishnah represents the opinion of Rebbe Meir, and the Mishnah in Makis represents the other Tanaic opinion. The Rashi points out that just reminds us of a Gemara that we've learned. Money. Rashi says, our Mishnah that said that one who has intimacy with his sister, he rapes his sister, he has to pay 50 pieces of silver. Rebbe Meir, this is in accordance with Rebbe Meir, the Amar Liel, Rebbe Meir who has been recorded earlier, that says loike u'mishalem. There is Malkos, and there's payment as well. Shelo Hashem HaMavir Lidei Makas, the source that imposes the lashing penalty, is a different source. Mavio Lidei Tashlum is a different source than that which is that which imposes the financial payment. So since there are two different sources, we can impose the two punishments: loike u'mishalem. The Gemara now asks a question. Rebbe Meir, if our Mishnah is authored by Rebbe Meir, when we speak about Mishnayos, one should bear in mind that in the printed Talmud, Mishnayos are broken up the way they are. However, when you view a Mishnah, sometimes the subsequent Mishnah that may appear several pages later, as is the case here, we have a Mishnah coming up on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. This is considered a continuation of our Mishnah. So when saying that our Mishnah is authored by Rebbe Meir, we have to assume then that Rebbe Meir is the author of the upcoming Mishnah as well. And that upcoming Mishnah speaks about a father raping his daughter. So the Gemara continues with a question that lasts a number of lines. Rebbe Meir, if our Mishnah is authored by Rebbe Meir, afilu bitonami, then raping one's daughter also should result in payment. Just like Bo'ala Choso, you say, is loike u'mishalem, he will get lashed as well as pay the knas. The same should be with regard to raping one's daughter. V'chitema, and we have to point out that the Mishnah later on says that there is no payment. It's very important to note that. So if our Mishnah is in accordance with Rebbe Meir, so there should be payment as well in the case of Bo'al Bito. V'chitemo, you might say Rebbe Meir loiku mishalim islay mesu mishalim leslay, that Rebbe Meir can see lashing combined with payment. That's a possibility. But being put to death plus payment, which would happen in the case of someone who rapes his daughter carries with it a death penalty. Raping one's sister does not carry with it a death penalty. It carries with it a potential for lashing. It's a chiyuv kores, and it's a negative command that's been violated, so there's a potential for lashing, let us put it that way. Not so in the case of daughter. In the case of Bo'al Bito, there is a death penalty. So you might want to say that Rebbe Meir holds that their loke u'mishalim could be, but when you're dealing with a death penalty and payment, that cannot be. V'lo v'hotanya. We're going to show you that Rebbe Meir doesn't make that distinction. Rebbe Meir says that there meis u'mishalim also exists, just like loke u'mishalim, meis u'mishalim as well. So we have a source, v'hotanya. And in this source, you'll notice that it's a frame section at the last line of the source. Rebbe Meir's name appears, and he says the following: Gonav v'tovach b'Shabbos, Gonav v'tovach levitis kechovim, Gonav shor aniskal v'tovachoy. A person steals an animal and slaughters it in case one on Shabbos. He stole an animal and slaughters it as an idolatrous offering. A person steals a shor haniskal. A shor haniskal is an animal that is sentenced to death. Niskal means to be stoned. A shor that's to be stoned. So he stole such an animal and then slaughtered it. Mishalem Tashlumi Arbor V'Chamisha Divrei Rabbi Meir. The Torah fine for stealing and slaughtering is such that you pay, depending on what kind of animal, either 4 times the value of the animal or 5 times the value of the animal. If it's a large animal, a par, an ox, a bull, this kind of animal that you simply walk out with it when you're stealing it, so you'll pay 4 times the amount. If it's a sheep that you have to, that the thief has to schlep out on his back, he'll pay. Actually, let me correct it myself. 4 times for the sheep and 5 times for the cow. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The Chachamim exempt. So what do we see though? We see capital offenses like a Shabbos violation or idolatry. We see capital offenses, and we see payment made as well in the name of Rabbi Meir. So at this point, we have a difficulty in setting up our Mishnah like Rabbi Meir. And what's the difficulty? Though you might want to say he holds lokel mishalem, then the same should apply to the case of the daughter. As far as that question is concerned, the Gemara answers it. Ha itmar Allah Amar Rav Yankiv Amar Rav Yochanan. Really, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that there is no meis u'mishalem. Namely, loiku mishalem exists. That's why there is a fine paid in our Mishnah at the beginning of the parak. And as far as Bito is concerned, there is no fine paid because he does not accept mesu mishalem. And as far as the source, Ganav Atava B'Shabbos, we have an answer for that. And that's what the Gemara goes on to say. Ha'itmar al-Omer of Yankiv, Omer Rav Yochanan, the Amri Law, another version of names. Omer Rav Yirmiyah, Omer Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Ovin, Rabbi Allah V'chol, Chavurta Mishmei, the Rabbi Yochanan Amri. There are a lot of names over here, but we highlighted this name, Rabbi Yochanan, in a house, and we'll explain the marking later. It was all said, the entire Chavurta, the entire gathering of scholars said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, B'toveach al yedei acher. The Ganav, in the case of Ganav Atava Shabbos, the Ganav, the thief, instructed his agent to slaughter the animal, and the thief will end up paying, but the thief did not commit the capital offense. So Reish Lakish's answer stands in the meantime that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and the Mishnah in Makis is authored by other Tanoim. The reference to payment in our Mishnah is in addition to the Malkos, and the Mishnah in Makis, which does not speak about payment, it's only Malkos, that's a different Tanaic authority. Loike u'mishalem is Rabbi Meir's Shita. And along with that, we're also pointing out that there is no meis u'mishalem. We have a very dramatic, we'll say, marking situation. This whole sugya, this is a very, very long sugya, as we pointed out, starting on Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, continuing to Lamed Hey Amid Beis, and there's a lot of activity in the intervening pages. Here we have a very, very long bracketed section. Notice it goes all the way till the end of Lamed Dalet Amid Aleph. This will, of course, this extends beyond the context of our Daf Yomi shiur, so we're going to have to navigate closely with the markings. Having noted Rabbi Yochanan in the house, what is Rabbi Yochanan's role over here? Rabbi Yochanan's role here is to dispel the question raised on Reish Lakish from the It's not as if Rabbi Yochanan is answering. It's information that we've cited in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. It's not that Rabbi Yochanan himself is answering the question that was raised on Reish Lakish, but it's information in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that was presented by either Rabbi Yankiv or we had a lot of other names as well. And the way to dispel the question was that the Gonav v'Tovach b'Shabbos is talking about two different people. There's the thief, he has to make the payments. He is not the one that committed the capital offense. So it's not an example of Meis u'Mishalem. If you say that the Ganav did the thief also did the slaughtering on Shabbos, or also did the slaughtering to the idol, then you would have a case of Meis u'Mishalem, and we'd have a problem. We have a problem, this source versus the case of Bito, where there was no Mishalim, which is also a capital offense. But it's not talking about the same guy as far as this approach of house number 1. To repeat, house number 1 says that the case of Gonav v'Tovach Shabbos was Toveach al Yedei Acher. So the Ganav, he is the one that's going to have to pay the money mentioned, the 4 or 5 payment. If you skip this long bracketed section, you hit Rabbah, and as I said, this is not part of textually. This will not be covered in today's shiur. But you go to the bottom of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, and notice how the Gemara reads: Rabbah Omar le'olam b'tovech al yedei atzmoi. The source of Gonav v'Tovach Shabbos does not involve two people. So Rabbah is house number 2. It's a different approach than that taken by Rabbi Yochanan. It's the same individual. The thief is the one that's slaughtering, and the problem then comes up. What about the Bito case? The father intimacy with daughter is same in a halachic framework, is the same as Toveach b'Shabbos. They're both capital offenses, and they're both issues that have a money aspect to them as well. And yet, if you want to, like Reish Lakish says, push the point that Rabbi Meir is the author of our Mishnah, then how can Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah coexist with Rabbi Meir in the case of Toveach b'Shabbos? So Rabbah offers an answer to that, and his answer goes on to the top of Lamed Daled Amud Beis, where the Gemara reads Rabbi Meir loiku mishalim islay meisu mishalim leslay. In fact, as we've been saying till now, that when it's a case of malkos, lashing, and money, that we can impose on a perpetrator, both penalties. Meisu Misham, let's say, death plus pain we cannot impose, and that explains the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Fine. What about Toveach HaYedei? What about Gonav v'Tovach b'Shabbos? What about that? The shiny honey, the Gemara says, second line from the top of Lamed Daled Amud Beis, the chidush hu shechish torah beknas. There's a special realm of financial penalty that is out of the realm of standard tort compensation. It is called knas. Knas in English is often translated as a fine. It's not we'll say market value loss compensation, but it's a Torah standard fixed amount that the Torah imposes. It's called a knas, and the concept of knas is manifest over here, that you're going to pay. You're not paying just the simple value of the animal. You're paying either 4 times the value of the animal or 5 times the value of the animal. That's called a knas payment. And when it comes to the realm of knas payments, there we have a chidush. This is a novel point, that afal gav de mikol, even though the perpetrator, the offender, is put to death, he also does pay, so that you don't have an issue here of we'll say a contradiction within Shitas Rabbi Meir. More has to be said on that matter, but that's already really spilling over beyond the realm of our shiur. So in the meantime, since we've pointed out the superstructure, we had Reish Lakish explaining that our Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Meir, including the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Lamed Beis with Bito. We have the question posed on Reish Lakish from Gonav V'Tava B'Shabbos. We have Rabbi Yochanan, house number 1, answering that question, that Gonav V'Tava B'Shabbos does not represent a case of Meis U'Mishalem. Why? Because it was Toiveach al Yedei Acher. And now in the bracketed section, we're going to focus, and you can see it's a very long discussion. It gets us very much off the point of the general subject, the general sugya, and we're going to start a long discussion focusing on this case of Gonav V'Tavach B'Shabbos. And we have a note, but we just said Baal Peh, we said orally, we tried to explain this with our notes on the side of the Gemara. First of all, we have a Nosei Mivneh heading. The Nosei Mivneh reads in Adaf Lamed Dalet that this topic, this structural note, is to cover Daf Lamed Dalet as well. Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabba les lehu meis u'mishalem. Both of them agree in principle that you can't have meis u'mishalem. We can add like Aliba de Rabbi Meir, because that's the name that Reish Lakish was using here. V'cholkim be'eich lahasbir hamoker shagona v'tava b'Shabbos. They, Rab and Rabbi Yochanan, argue in how to explain the case of Gonav v'tavach b'Shabbos. A guy stole and slaughtered an animal on Shabbos. Sheboy royim l'chora. There we see it appears that we see meis u'mishalem, that there is a death penalty plus financial restitution. And Rabbi Yochanan's solution is toveh hayidei acher, which we already mentioned, and Rabbo's solution is toveh hayidei atzmo v'yesh chidush b'knas shemeis u'mishalem. And when it comes to a knas payment, as we explained earlier, there, even though in terms of mammon payments, market value restitution, we don't say meis u'mishalem, capital punishment plus payment, but when it comes to knas type payments, those are the payments we mentioned that don't reflect the simple market loss issue. There we have meis u'mishalem when it comes to knas. The starred note in the other margin of the Gemara, explaining the brackets, it explains as we already did, but we'll read the note together. So Graham l'shem dilu kedei lahatzmid. The brackets are for skipping purposes in order to attach machlekusim shel Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabba, to have the two opinions, those of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabba, next to each other. The havonas chiyuv tashlum shemuva b'moker shel Gonav v'Tavach, to explain the payment, who is making the payment in that Tanaic source of Gonav v'Tavach. B'sochas Gemara masbira as hamoker lifrotel. Within the bracketed section, the Gemara will be focusing on this source. So I hope that we've exhausted the issue of structure, and now we'll focus on the understanding of the source of Gonav v'Tavach b'Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan explained that the case of Gonav v'Tavach b'Shabbos is one man did the theft and another man did the actual slaughtering. The slaughtering, when done on Shabbos, is an act that is a Shabbos violation and punishable by death. When we speak about the 4 or 5 payment, someone steals a cow or a sheep, he has to pay. He steals it and slaughters. If it is stolen and slaughtered, so you'll have to pay either 4 or 5 times the value. Let's just break this down a little bit. Geneva, that itself generates what's called kefel, a payment of twice the value of the creature. Geneva then equals kefel, or 2 times. Then the subsequent slaughtering of it, it means you have to pay again another twice value, for a total of 4 times the original animal's value. So you have an issue of principal plus 3. If you say 4 times the value, when he steals a sheep, so he has to schlep it out on his shoulders, so he pays only 4 times the value. If he takes a large animal, it's easy for him to steal it, so we tell him you have to pay 5 times the value. But the breakdown of those amounts there's principal, and then for the theft, principal plus 1, that gives you're paying twice the animal's value, and then for the slaughter of it, another twice or 3 times the value. The Gemara asks in the brackets, can it be that the agent does the sin, and as a result of the slaughtering of the shaliach, of the agent, the ganav, he's the one that sent him on the mission, that he is going to have to pay? Generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that ein shliach lidvar avera, that when something is done by an emissary, it doesn't reflect back on the one that sent him. Why in this case does the action done by the emissary reflect back on the original sender? Omar Rava, Omar Rachmana, Utvachai Omacharo. The pasuk says in this context of theft and slaughtering, the rule is if the thief either slaughters it or the thief sells it to a third party, the thief has to pay the arba chamisha, 4 or 5 time value. And in this pasuk there are 2 actions. There's either the slaughtering or sale. We compare the 2 on an abstract level. Ma mechira al yedei acher, just like the sale. How do you sell something? You have to have an acher. You have to have another party involved. So just like if you have the thief, he steals the animal and then sells it. He sells it to someone else. So too, the act of slaughtering is assumed by the Torah to be something that would be done even by someone else. So that even though you have another party doing it, it's no different than the case of mechira. What happens if a thief sells the animal to someone else? So the thief has to pay 4 or 5 times the value. So too, if the thief, he stole the animal and someone else does the slaughtering of the animal, the thief has to pay 4 or 5 times the value. That's the first of 3 approaches. Not a second approach. Beis. The Bei Rabbi Yishmael Tana. Oy. The pasuk said utvachai oy mechara. The word oy is l'rabois es hashaliach. It comes to include. Instead of the pasuk saying tvacho umecharo, it says tvacho o mecharo. That is we can view that as an extra word that's coming to include a shaliach. That even though in general the emissary's action does not reflect back on the sender, in this case it does. And a third approach, the Bei Chizkiah Tana Tachas. In the Chumash, it says Arba Shor Tachas Arba Se Tachas Aseh. The word Tachas in the pasuk is L'Rabois Es Ashaliach. It comes to include the possibility of an emissary. Maskif lo marzutra mi iko midi. Is there anything? Dilu ovad ihu lo mechayev, the ovad shaliach umechayev. Had the thief himself done the slaughtering, so he would not be obligated to pay. But if the emissary does it, so there is an obligation to pay. Can that be? The Gemara answers, Ihu, the case of the thief himself, it's true that if the thief himself would have slaughtered it, he wouldn't have to pay. However, the Gemara explains, Ihu lav mishum delo mechayev. It's his exemption from paying isn't because he is potter, he is free from paying, that he is not obligated to pay. Ela mishum dekom leiber the Rabba Munei. The truth is that he is obligated to pay. The only thing is that he also had the thief himself done the slaughtering. He, in addition to the paying aspect, he also has a more severe capital offense. And when we mete out punishment, we give the more serious form of punishment. That's kom le b'da Rabba. Rabba means the greater of the punishments. So that the objection raised by Mar Zutra, meaning could it be that if the perpetrator himself did the slaughtering, he wouldn't have to pay, and his emissary doing it makes the original perpetrator pay? That's not an accurate statement. Rather, the original thief is also obligated to pay in theory. It's just that he has a more serious punishment to receive, and that's why, in his case, you see only the death penalty meted out had he slaughtered it himself. In the case that someone else slaughters it, so then the original thief isn't confronted with a problem of a death penalty. So then there is room to activate the financial punishment that he was chayav anyway in. The Gemara asks, if we're now explaining the source above of Gona v'Tava b'Shabbos as a case of someone else doing the slaughtering, my taimayu de Rabbanan de Patri. Notice we have arrows to the right hand side of the Gemara text. You can align this with the arrow above. Why do the Rabbanan mention exemption? Why is the thief a potter? The Gemara says, Man Chachamim. Who is the Chachamim in that source? It's usually the word Chachamim represents a majority opinion, a number of scholars. In this case, the Chachamim actually is a specific Tanaic opinion, and we continue at the top of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. Rabbi Shimon he. This Chachamim is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon the Omar. Shchita she'ena ruya lo shma shchita. A slaughtering that does not lead to your ability to eat it. It's eina ruya. It's not fit for eating. Slaughtering that doesn't lead up to your eating it is not called an act of slaughtering. It might be an act of killing it, but it's not an act of slaughtering. For the Torah to impose the payment of 4 or 5 times the value of the animal, you have to have what's called tvacho. Tvacho is the Torah word for shchita, and as far as Reb Shimon is concerned, it means a proper shchita that leads to your ability to eat it. But if it's a shchita that doesn't lead to your ability to eat it, it's not called a shchita. It's not called a tvicha. And if it's not called a tvicha, so you are exempt from the 4 or 5 payment. So when we look at the source that had the 3 different examples, the 3 different cases of theft and subsequent slaughtering, what are we expected then to see in that source? We see in the source examples of shchita she'ena ruya. And Reb Shimon, who is the Chachamim in this source, says shchita she'ena ruya lo shma shchita. It's not considered shchita. The Tanakama, Rabbi Meir, he doesn't hold that way. Even if it's a shchita she'ena ruya, that's still called a shchita, and therefore you do have to pay. Now, in that source we have 3 examples. Are those cases of slaughterings that in fact are slaughterings whereby you cannot eat the meat? That is true with regard to examples 2 and 3. If you take an animal and slaughter it for idolatrous purposes, you render it unfit for eating. If you slaughter a condemned ox, once the ox is condemned to be stoned, so it's forbidden for you to benefit from it. Ela Shlita Shabbos, the case number one in that source, Shlita Ruyohi. It's not, one is not allowed to slaughter meat on Shabbos, but if one slaughters meat on Shabbos, it ultimately can, it's something that can, it's meat that can be eaten, Desnan, as the source says, Hashaychid b'Shabbos Yom Kippurim, one who slaughters an animal on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur, Afal Pishim, Mischayev b'Nafsho, even though he's committed a very serious offense. On Shabbos it's a capital offense, and on Yom Kippur he's Chayev Kores, he's Mischayev b'Nafsho, Nevertheless Shchitaso Kshera. You can eat from the meat. The Gemara answers that the Chachomim, namely Rabbi Shimon, with regard to Shlita b'Shabbos, Sovar Law Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar. He adopts Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar's approach to this matter. The Sanya, and we have a Tanaic source. There are a lot of opinions, or three opinions in this source, but we want to focus on Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, whose name is dashed, underlined a couple lines from now. What does it say in the source? The Sanya, Mavashel b'Shabbos, the one who cooks on Shabbos. Cooking and slaughtering are different examples of ovos malachos. They're the same thing for our purposes, so don't let the example confuse you. It's an act of Shabbos violation. Hamavashel b'Shabbos b'shogeg yochal b'mezid lo yochal divrei Rabbi Meir. One who cooks on Shabbos unintentionally, forgot that it's Shabbos. The food can be eaten. If one did so intentionally, it cannot be eaten. Rabbi Yomer b'shogeg yochal l'moitzoy Shabbos. If the cooking was done unintentionally, so the food can be eaten Saturday night, and when Shabbos departs, b'mezid lo yochal olomis. If the cooking was done intentionally, so the food remains permanently forbidden for you to eat. Others could eat it, according to Rabbi Yehuda, but you who cooked it up, you cannot eat it permanently. And Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar Omer, b'shoigeg, if it was done unintentionally, he's very strict. He says that an unintentional act of cooking, the one who did it cannot benefit from it, but others can, and only Saturday night. B'mezid, and this is what is of interest to us. If cooking was done on Shabbos intentionally, lo yochal oilamis lo iloi v'loi lachirim, but rather it's sold to a goy. It's sold. So the money you get, you can benefit from, but the meat or the food item itself, you cannot benefit from. So what do we see from here? That for our purposes, the shchita that's done on Shabbos, if it's done intentionally, it's called a shchita she'ena ruyas. You have all three examples in the source are shchita she'ena ruya, and according to the Cholim, i.e. Reb Shimon, shchita she'ena ruya lo shmo shchita, and that's why there is exemption. The Gemara here goes on with regard to the sources for these opinions. The Gemara asks right now, my taima de Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, what's the basis for Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar saying that Maisa Shabbos, that an act done that constitutes Shabbos violation, results in the food being Ozer b'achila? From where do we learn that? So the answer to that is Kididorish Rav Chia Apischa de Beinasiyah, as Rav Chia explained at the entrance to the house of the Nasiya, the head of the Jewish community. The pasuk says, "Ushmartem es Shabbos ki kodesh lochem." One shall keep the Shabbos, observe the Shabbos, because it is holy. Holy, the concept of kodesh is something we are familiar with in the case of sacrifices in the Beis Hamikdash. Ma kodesh oser b'achila, just like something that's sanctified is something that you cannot eat from. If you dedicate something as kodesh, as to the Beis Hamikdash, so you cannot eat from it. Af ma'aser Shabbos asur b'achila. So too, actions done on Shabbos result in their becoming prohibited in eating. Ma kodesh oser b'hano, af ma'aser Shabbos oser b'hano. Are we to say that just like when you dedicate something to the Beis Hamikdash, you cannot derive any personal benefit from it, not just eating, but any other personal benefit, so too Maisa Shabbos is the same? we pointed out before under the Rabbi Yehonasan law, even though it wasn't in the Gemara text, but Rashi mentions it, the prohibition is only one of eating, but you can sell it and benefit from the money. But if you're going to compare it to kodesh, to sacrifices, to sanctification of things, you wouldn't be allowed to do that either. So, and yet we are. Why is it that we don't continue this comparison between Shabbos and Kodshim all the way? Talmud loymar lochem. The pasuk said, Ki kodesh hi lochem. And that word lochem is shelochem yehei. It is unto you. You are allowed to benefit from it. So that you can't eat from it. That is the comparison to kodesh. But you are allowed to benefit from it because in the merit of the word lochem that appears in the pasuk. Yochol afilu b'shogeg. Does this apply even if the act is done unintentionally, that it would be forbidden to be eaten? It says in the same pasuk that one who violates the Shabbos is to be put to death. And put to death is someone who violates Shabbos intentionally, not unintentionally. This rule applies only when the violation was done intentionally. The prohibition of eating does not apply when it was done unintentionally. Of course, Rabbi Yochanan Berger had a restriction within the realm of shogeg, but you see there that it could be eaten just by others, not by the offender himself. As you can see, we've spilled over quite a bit as far as the Daf Yomi structure of our shiur. So we'll pause here, but we're really in the middle of a discussion.